My name's Greig Fraser. I'm the cinematographer of Dune Part 2. Denis and I had a very long run doing Dune Part 1. A lot of that film was set in Caladan, not on Arrakis. Some of the film was at the end, but it wasn't really that much set out in the desert. Denis was very clear about Arrakis is a character in our film. We need to feel the heat. We need to feel the torture that is being outside in Arrakis. But one of the things that really he was very precise about was the worm ride, because we'd only glanced at the worm in Part 1, and it really only made a sort of a small appearance. For Part 2, the worm ride is effectively Paul's perspective. We also have the perspective of Chani, who's acting as the perspective of the Fremen who are watching. But the camera and the lighting choices and the movement choices are all based directly on how those characters are feeling and behaving at that particular point in time. The main emotion we were trying to capture when we were filming the prelude to the actual worm ride was the nervousness from Chani, the emotional nervousness, and I think that's pretty well reflected in the way the camera moves. The camera has a little more movement, as in it's more handheld, it feels a little bit more emotional, but then we cut back to Paul, and a lot of Paul's work is a lot more still. It's him trying to sort of meditate, become one with the worm to try and make sure that he rides this thing properly. It was very important that the camera mirrored the character's journey and the character's emotional journey at that point in time. Early on in Part 1, we tested film and digital as two separate entities to shoot. We genuinely thought early on in the testing process that this was going to be a film shot on film. When we got into testing, we felt that film probably wasn't right for it. We shot digitally, but then did a film out process, which is something that I'd been toying with Photocam for a few years before that to test the process of actually adding film to the process at the end rather than the beginning. What we found was that gave us an interesting look that was unlike film, it was unlike digital. It sort of creates its own little world that's different to anything else that I'd done before, and the same with Denis. So we decided that film out was a really important aspect of the look. We were able to create a LUT through a skip bleach process. The highlights became a skip bleach part, and then the shadows became a digital. So we're able to kind of combine a film emulation to create a LUT that creates a look that I've not seen before. For the film itself and this scene, we shot with the Alexa 65 and the Alexa LF. Both cameras we used kind of interchangeably depending on what we wanted to do with the ratio. The thought was that the whole film should be shot for IMAX and for that ratio, because it's such a powerful, immersive format that we felt like it was the only real choice we could make for this journey. The IMAX ratio and the IMAX experience is unlike anything else. It's probably the most immersive experience that I've ever had in theatre. If we're watching something in IMAX, then it becomes something that you forget where you're sitting. You forget where you are. You become immersed in the filmmaker's vision, effectively, because it meant that we really needed the audience to feel like they were part of Paul's journey and part of the journey that all these Fremen were going on. The lens choices were interesting because on Part 1, we had shot with anamorphic lenses for Caladan and we'd shot with spherical lenses for Arrakis. The camera needs to mirror Paul's journey, effectively, which is why we opened up to an IMAX ratio when Paul set foot on Arrakis. Natural light for Denis, for this film, and for myself, was insanely important. Part of the reason why things took so long to make and we were so precise about things is because daylight had to feel real and natural. In the film world, we can kind of cheat where the direction of daylight comes from on actors. You'll watch a film and you'll rarely see somebody front lit. You'll mostly see people that are backlit, which is a little bit magical if you think about it, when two people face each other and they're both backlit. For this particular sequence, it was really important that the sun came from one direction. And it's very clear where the sun comes from because you have a lit side of the sand dune and you have a shadowed side of the sand dune, which means that we could not cheat his placement on a sand dune just to have backlight on him. We had to make sure that we had front light on the sand dune. Sandworm comes in through the lit side, through the sun side, and then he falls at massive speed and lands on the sandworm in shadow, in darkness. So it was a very important narrative choice to make. The sun became a really incredible, important part of the process. And we felt like if we're going to be sort of going out on a limb and showing the world worm writing like this, that we may as well do it without anyone sort of fearing like it was false. So all of the worm writing was done with natural daylight. Let's play the scene back for reference. The R&D on that sequence was mixed. There were some shots that were very easy to get, but then there were other shots that took an inordinate amount of time. Like, for example, the shot of him standing up riding, we couldn't get the shake of the camera right. He was obviously not moving. So we had to find a way to make the camera feel like it was tracking with him and have just the right amount of shake and just the right amount of movement. We shot it with a test, didn't work. Shot it again, didn't work. There were multiple shots that took many days or even weeks of R&D to get even a single shot. Some were easier than others, but then there were others that were insanely hard. Early on when we started talking about the sandworm writing, it was very, very hard to find reference for how it should look. We looked quite extensively at avalanche videos, surf videos. We tried to see what it would be like when Paul was literally under the water, but in this case, sand. Biggest challenges on this is that, worms don't exist. But the elements that do exist, we were able to build. We were able to build what he is standing on and writing on, but we're also able to build and create the right amount of sand and the right amount of daylight. One of the great things about Paul, who's our VFX supervisor, he's a firm believer in creating as much in camera as possible so that when he creates his magic, that it blends in really well. Anytime that you're seeing close-ups of actors, anytime you're seeing mid-shots of actors, that's all in camera. Things beyond that, anytime there's an extension of the worm, is VFX. But for the most part, we fought really hard to try and get things as much in camera as possible. Given that this is the second outing with Denis, I think that the biggest takeaway that I learned was how in tune you can get with your director and with the actors and with the crew when it comes to creating something of this scale. Everything we did in this film was insanely hard. Like, there was not one easy sequence. I don't think, Denis wrote one simple scene. Every scene had a level of complexity that was sort of way beyond what I've done before. When you make a film, you're so intimately involved in every single detail that goes into every single shot. It's very hard to remove yourself from the actual process when you watch a film. Generally, all I can think of is how we did things, what we were doing on the day, the conversations that we were having leading up to that, the conversations we were having after we shot it. There's a lot of emotional baggage that goes on as a cinematographer. For me, having shot this movie, every time I watch this scene, I become completely immersed in it and I forget all about those conversations. I forget about every day that we were testing something and it failed, or then it succeeded, or every day that there was too much sand or not enough sand, or every day that the camera move didn't work, so we had to try a different way of doing it. There was a lot of R&D that went into this scene. It took months and months and months. But now when I watch it, I feel like we've nailed every part. There is not one part of any of those shots that I feel like has been compromised. Then combined with insanely incredible editing and sound design, all those things that Denis brought to the party as a director, I just think it's an incredible scene and I love watching it every single time.